In this lesson video, the key takeaway is to learn what makes a wrong answer choice wrong. And the related thought is that there is a pattern of wrong answer choice types on the GMAT. So familiarizing yourself with these patterns, with these common wrong answer types, and then of course applying that knowledge to doing practice questions will help you differentiate between the right answer and that one or two wrong answers that is trying to lure you in. So let's talk here about the wrong answer choice types. Starting with one, using words in the passage that twist the meaning. Now this sounds not too diabolical, but it can be very, very misleading when you take information, words that are around the answer choice, and package them in such a way where you make it so that it is wrong. It twists the meaning of what the passage is saying. However, because the words are so familiar, we think the answer choice is correct. And so we have to pick up on that slightly twisted meaning, as we'll do here in the examples that are coming. The next type of wrong answer choice is also very tricky. It is true, meaning that the wrong answer choice is correct in terms of the passage. You can find a part in the passage that has this wrong answer choice. However, it is the wrong part of the passage. In other words, it does not answer the question. It answers another potential question, one dealing with that part of the passage. So always make sure that you are in the right part of the passage when dealing with the question. Then there's true, but more in a broader sense, commonsensically, as far as the real world goes. Something that just seems to make sense, sound good, something most of us would agree with in general, but something that is not found in the passage. And this is also, along with 1 and 2, a common wrong answer trap. Next, we have what I call the rotten spot, meaning everything is worded perfectly, nicely in order, and it's so tempting to want to just circle that answer choice before you get to the very end. Or you sometimes gloss over a word, but it's that word, whether it's in the middle or at the very end, that is the rotten spot. That makes the answer choice wrong. Of course, reading too fast in general, as we are wont to do on a panic-inducing test like the GMAT, makes this wrong answer choice very important to pick up on. So make sure you read every word to the answer choice. And next, we have the flat-out wrong, or the irrelevant or out of scope, etc. The reason I've mentioned this is because this comes up in answer choices, and you will see when you are doing reading comp passages that it is oftentimes easy to get rid of 1 or 2. They're just clearly wrong. It's those last 2 or 3 where you're hunting for the answer. That's when these first 4 is going to become very important. So let's actually move on to a passage now. This, of course, should be a relatively familiar passage to you. We are dealing with the oligodendrocytes, or the ODs as I call them, and myelin regeneration. So refamiliarize yourself very quickly. You may want to pause the video, and when you've done that, we can resume. Okay, I assume you've paused the video. It says here, the passage mentions how both hemispheres of the brain respond to injury in order to do what? So if we look here back at between the first and the second sentence, it says, myelin regeneration is not the only significant factor to contribute to brain plasticity. For instance, the brain hemispheres, using both of them, especially after injury, that also contributes to brain plasticity. Therefore, the author mentions both hemispheres to show that the brain is also plastic in other ways. Notice how I have answered that question, anticipated the answer by going back to the passage, and now I can look at the answer choices with the sense of what the answer should be. Let's start with A. Discuss how myelin regeneration may serve a greater function than previously thought. What a nice answer choice. Myelin regeneration. It's mentioned right up there. But what is answer choice A actually saying? Discuss how myelin regeneration may serve a greater function than previously thought. Wait a second, the focus was on the hemispheres and plasticity. So get rid of this one. We can see that it takes elements in the passage nearby the answer choice and twists them. Next we have B. Show that brain plasticity is not limited to one factor. Again, going back to the first sentence, it says that myelin regeneration may not be the only factor to brain plasticity. There could be something else, such as brain hemispheres. Therefore, that's the additional factor. Now notice that I did not, in this answer choice, put brain hemispheres. Notice that I use one factor to stand in for brain hemispheres. And that is exactly what the GMAT will do, because they want to make the answer choice slightly vague. Not wrong, by no means wrong, but by no means explicit by spelling everything out. Clearly, this one factor is referring to both hemispheres, and therefore brain plasticity referring to hemispheres is the answer choice. And now we can move on to the next one. C suggests that oligodendrocytes might have a role in how the two hemispheres work. I didn't actually excerpt this part of the passage, but if I had right here started with the next few words, the next sentence, then answer choice C would have been there word for word. So when something is supported in the text, but it is not the answer, it doesn't answer the question. Wrong part of the passage, so therefore we can get rid of C. Next, D. Highlight one way in which stroke patients recover. Now this is tempting only because they mention stroke patients, but they mention it farther down from where we're actually focused on, which is here. That's where the answer is. So in a way, wrong part of the passage, but the passage isn't mentioning the hemispheres to talk about why stroke patients recover. That's just a detail. It's not the whole point of the paragraph to relate hemispheres to brain plasticity. So more or less, it's flat out wrong. Finally, E. Question the connection between oligodendrocytes, or ODs, and the speed in which myelin is replaced. So this is something that was also in another part of the passage. Again, it's not a part I excerpted, but it's important to know that there will be things will be familiar in terms of the answer choices because you've read them in other parts of the passage. But don't just go back to that part of the passage and say, oh yes, it is saying this, because you always have to remember what is the question asking for. And again, that's why anticipation of the answer choice by going back to the passage before looking at the answer choices and coming up with your own answer is very helpful. Okay, so now we can look here at another question. Yes, that is a question. It is not the passage excerpted. I agree. This is a long, convoluted question, and these oftentimes come up, especially on the harder GMAT passages. So there is an additional step. If the question stem, meaning the part next to the red underlined part here, when this is very complex, and that is you want to try to simplify the question yourself. So why don't you try that? Read the question, try not to read it more than twice, and try simplifying it. Okay, I assume you've done so, and this is what I've come up with. Not maybe the most beautiful simplification in the world, but hopefully better than what we started with. So here we have, knowing how much human brain relies on both hemispheres is not a strong basis for knowing how OD is related to plasticity because, and let's bring up the part of the passage that is relevant here. It says, nonetheless, such a relationship might be difficult to ascertain since the ODs themselves might play a role in how efficiently the brain uses both hemispheres. Aha! The idea of how plastic your hemispheres are is something that's not separate from ODs. ODs may play a part. Therefore, we're going to answer the question as we did here by going back to the passage. So try it again, because why? So I'll pause the video and write down somewhere your own answer to the question. Okay, I assume you've done that. And we have here, again, my not necessarily eloquent answer is ODs might play a part in how brain uses both hemispheres. So now we have the answer. OD might play a part in how brain uses both hemispheres. Let's look at A. Brain trauma is rarely limited to one side of the brain. This is flat out wrong because it clearly mentions that in brain trauma, both parts of the hemispheres are there. So that is something we can confidently eliminate. But what about B? Myelin regeneration might not be the only measure of brain plasticity. This does sound familiar, but wait a second. This is the beginning of that previous paragraph we had to the previous question. So it looks familiar, but that doesn't answer this question number 2. It answered question number 1. So watch out for those. C, the human brain is too complex for scientists to understand. In the previous question, we didn't have this wrong answer trap, but here we have it. If you remember from the very first slide, we talked about something that is commonsensical, something that most people agree with in reality. Yeah, the human brain is very complex. However, this is not something that is mentioned in the passage, so do not be tempted by it. D, the oligodendrocytes might be involved in how the brain uses both hemispheres. Okay, so this might be the answer because if we look back here, it says OD might play a part in how brain uses both hemispheres. So we go back down here. How similar is that? The ODs might be involved in how the brain uses both hemispheres. So there you go. Very similar, though not exactly what we had, but very similar to our own answer choice. Finally, E. Only recently scientists have begun to use human brains to understand how new cells grow. Now this is tempting because it talks about how scientists have only really begun to recently use human brains. They had been using rat and mice brains. But wait a second, things are starting to get fishy. To understand how new cells grow, well, it talked about how the ODs actually, unlike the ODs in the rats and the mice, didn't have to grow new ODs. They barely lost any of their ODs, and that was the reason why the brain was more plastic in humans. And so this is something that's fishy, this new cells. It never mentions new cells growing in relation to humans, but into rats and mice. And so E maybe even has a little bit of twisting things around there going on as well. So we've gotten to the end of these wrong answer traps, and you can see that there's usually a medley of them, many different kinds. Sometimes there may be two that are flat out wrong. And on the harder questions, you may see a few that relate to other parts of the passage or that are very subtle about how they twist the meaning. So the key, of course, is to be ready for these various wrong answer types. So know and anticipate them. The thing is, and I think it may be tempting to want to go to the OG and begin doing all of your practice sessions this way. However, do not sit there and laboriously go through each answer choice trying to list it off unless you're just doing an exercise. The way you should use this is, of course, when you want to or when you're stuck between a couple of answer choices. Now, another important point to mention is that you should understand the passage first. You shouldn't think, oh, I think this trap is doing A, B, and C, and this trap is doing number 4 that was shown on that video. Unless you understand the passage, you're going to identify those traps incorrectly in the first place. So knowing traps in general is not a substitute for understanding the passage. And of course, as I've really drilled in, is the idea of answering in your own words. Don't let answer choices do the thinking for you, but go back to the passage and come up with your own answer as we did here in the video. Now, I'm going to say this one more time because I think it's important, is the idea that you are not trying to identify every wrong answer type. You're not slowing down and trying to read every single answer choice and go back and think, hey, sounds like this type of error. It's usually when you're down to 2 or 3 that knowing the wrong answer choice type is important, and also knowing the wrong answer choice types that typically get you. So in your practice or your study sessions, when you get something wrong, don't just say, oh, it's wrong. Say it's wrong because it's one of these wrong answer types, and oh, look, in general, I tend to be fooled by this wrong answer type. Having that sort of knowledge and that breakthrough is one way you will get better at the reading comprehension passages.